It's 7:13 p.m. and I'm calling the June 3rd Hamilton Planning Board meeting to order. The meeting is being recorded by HWCAM and there's Zoom access. So I'll start by taking roll. So when I call your name, would you please indicate that you're present? Pat Norton.
Present.
Jonathan Poor.
Jonathan Poor, present.
Emil Dahlquist.
Emil Dahlquist, present.
Bill Wheaton.
Bill Wheaton, present.
Beth Herr.
Beth Herr, present.
Darcy Dale.
Darcy Dale, present.
Matt Hamill.
Present.
Jeff Austin.
Present.
And Marnie Crouch, present. So we have on our agenda this evening a tree removal on a scenic road, that being Bridge Street. And the planning director has received a letter from TEC Engineering Corporation on behalf of Tim Olson, who is head of the Hamilton Department of Public Works. And there is a request for a continuance of the tree removal hearing and a request that it be rescheduled for July 1st. We do not have a planning board meeting on July 1st. We do have one on July 7th. So our planning director can coordinate when that meeting will be held, but I have no problem granting that request for a continuance. And since Mr. Olson isn't here, nor a representative from TEC, we couldn't go forward in any event. So that agenda item is now off the table.
There is a rep from TEC on the Zoom.
Oh, there is a representative from...
Perry.
The gentleman who was trying to talk earlier.
Oh,
Perry.
did he want to...
Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Matt Perry. I'm a civil engineer with TEC. I did request a continuance for tonight's hearing as we gather additional information. There's still some unanswered questions regarding a few aspects of the project. However, Planning Director Mark Connors did ask that I hop on the Zoom call tonight to just introduce myself, I guess. And he said that some of the abutters weren't aware of the continuance.
Yeah, his microphone is muted. Matt, your microphone's muted if you can hear us.
Was I on mute that entire time?
Not the entire time.
We missed a lot of what you were
You
saying.
said something about the abutters might be here, and then we lost you after that.
I can't. I'm not sure if you guys can hear me or not.
Yes.
You can? Okay. Did you miss that entire bit there?
Yes.
I can't. I don't have any audio from you guys right now. I'm sorry.
HWCAM is on mute.
I'll just repeat what I said. I can't hear you guys, like I said, but my name is Matt Perry. I'm a civil engineer with TEC here on behalf of the Department of Public Works. We did request a continuance for tonight's hearing just as we gather additional information. There's a few unanswered questions regarding a few aspects of the project that we didn't have answers for yet, so we wanted to come prepared, and we will have that for that meeting that's scheduled for the July 7th, I think is what I heard. So, but Mark did request that I come on tonight just to introduce myself, and I know that there are some abutters that showed up tonight, and we didn't want to leave them, stranded or hanging. So that was per Mark's request that I show up tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, I think I can hear you guys now.
July 1st.
We do?
Yes.
What day is July 1st?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was reading the application deadline. That's hardly professional. Misstating the date of a meeting. Yes, July 1st.
July 1st. Got it.
Okay, well. Okay. All right, so then, now we can proceed with the next item on our agenda, which is consideration of the,
We vote to formally postpone it, the public hearing.
oh, and the
Do we need a
tree?
motion on that?
Oh, we do, okay, that is a public hearing. I apologize.
Are we going to
Okay.
make a motion to
Yes.
continue it?
Yes, to July 1st at 7 PM.
Do you want to do that?
Sorry.
I'll make a motion to continue the hearing for, the tree hearing to July 1st.
Second.
Okay, since we're all, no, Darcy's not here. So when I call your name, please indicate whether you assent. Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Beth Herr,
Beth, her, aye.
Darcy Dale,
Darcy Dale, I.
and Marnie Crouch, aye. So the public hearing on this tree removal application is continued to July 1st at 7 PM.
Great.
Thank you all for your time. We'll talk to you July 1st.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, turning to the continued public hearing on the zoning bylaw amendments. I think in your packet, you will find a memorandum, no, I apologize, an email that I sent to members of the select board this morning with respect to the fourth draft that we have received from UTO. And in that, I identified what I considered to be outstanding issues. And we can go through these. Mark, do you know if town council is here?
Yes, so Robin wasn't able to be here, but Carolyn Murray from KP Law is here. Thank you.
Okay.
Good evening, folks.
And Marnie, I wasn't, and maybe some other members of the planning board weren't at the select board hearing last night.
Right.
I'm not sure what the response was to your prior memo
So the
that was discussed at all.
right. So we had issued. Well, Emil and I had drafted a memo, and the planning board voted unanimously,
Correct.
Indicating that because of a number of outstanding issues, that we thought it might be advisable to continue the June 26th special town meeting to consider these zoning issues. And so the select board didn't act on that request, but they did continue the warrant. They didn't close the warrant. They kept it open until last night. And we spoke again last night, and long story short, they've now kept the warrant open until their next meeting, which is on
June 10th.
Tuesday, June 10th. Thank you. So their meeting is on Tuesday and June 10th. So in an email to the select board and Joe this morning, I identified issues that I thought remained outstanding with respect to the latest draft that we got from UTIL on May 29th. We can go through these. But in response to this email, we just were informed that the select board is amenable to continuing the special town meeting from June 26th to July 10th. And that gives the planning board more opportunities to vet what we have in front of us. It gives town council a lot more time to sort through what should be in the warrant articles, and more importantly, what should be in the appendices to the warrant articles, and we can discuss that. So today is June 3rd. We would then have 2 meetings before a July 10th.
A July 10th special town meeting?
Yes, the June 26th special town meeting would be continued to July 10th.
I can't imagine in the middle of summer doing a town meeting, but sure, I'm just a little shocked by that.
Well, there'll be a quorum or there won't be a quorum. That's how that works.
Yeah.
But so that's the status right now. So
That came from the select board, I'm sorry, I missed.
that came from Mark via Joe, right?
Okay.
Can you
Joe, who
elaborate?
talked to, my understanding is from the select board chair.
Okay, he talked to Bill Olson. Okay, I'm just trying to understand because I
Right,
came
so-
in late last night. but
Right,
I-
so Joe, I guess, and the select board chair communicated and made that agreement. So I don't know if you all have had an opportunity to go through the latest,
Marnie, excuse me, could you just repeat that, just so I understand what you just said about the meeting? Could you just repeat that? What just happened? Is the meeting changed to July 10th?
I don't believe it has been formally changed, but the select board chair, that would be Bill Olson, and Joe Demilovitz discussed continuing the special town meeting from June 26th to July 10th.
What does that mean, continuing? Does that mean not having it, or that you would have it and then you'd have it again?
Postpone.
No, we would postpone it.
Postpone it?
Yeah,
That would be continuing as a postponement.
Yeah.
There wouldn't be any meeting on the 26th. It'd be on the
It would be rescheduled to July 10th.
And they have the authority to do that?
Sure, it's just a question of notice.
And I'm assuming the entire select board has to vote on that. for
Well,
that
they can do that.
On the June
on-
10th meeting.
Yes, on the.
Okay, I just was, yeah.
So that's where we are. So, I assume you all have had the opportunity to read the latest draft. Do we have,
I feel like your sound is out. but-
my sound is,
Draft of the, oh yeah, he is. I think we turned on the master volume instead of just the PA.
Okay. Oh, thanks.
Do you need to fix something over there?
I don't think I did.
so, back to what I was saying, if everybody can hear me. I'm going to go through the issues that I identified, and if anybody else has other issues, now's the time to bring them forward. So the first issue
Oh,
that
yeah, I'm not sure.
that I identified, and there was a change from the third draft to the fourth draft. But that's the absence of any way to gauge full or partial compliance with the form-based code if you didn't fall into the category of a one or two family residence or the Depot Square district was involved. So what remained was just in section 9.8.1.3b, which I will read. All buildings, structures, or land in whole or in part must be used or occupied in conformance with this section. When any buildings or structures in whole or in part are erected, constructed, moved, enlarged, or structurally altered, they must conform to this section. Now, in my opinion, and that opinion is shared by Emil, we discussed this, the language applies to all nonconformities in the 3A districts in the town center. But the language is amorphous, it's ambiguous, and neither the public nor the planning board, or indeed other town officials, could interpret it consistently and fairly. And property owners certainly would not have any real understanding of what their rights and responsibilities are. So that was, in my view, the most glaring problem. And it is one that the planning board has raised in multiple meetings. I know we raised it at the last meeting. I know we raised it at the meeting before that. So it's imperative that we solved that problem. So if you recall, and then the other thing that happened is that UTIL elected to move the provisions with respect to single-family and two-family houses and the Depot Square district to Section 5 of our Hamilton zoning bylaws, which deals with nonconformities, uses and structures. And so I have reviewed Section 5 of our zoning bylaw, and I must say it's one of the least well-drafted bylaws that we have, because the language that empowers the ZBA to act is really loosey-goosey. Let's just say that. There's a complete absence of readily applicable standards. It's pretty loose. So that's a big item that has to be addressed. Emil prepared some language that we can look at, but I want to go through all the issues before we go back and address each one in more detail. So the next one that I identified is that the table of use regulations identified the planning board as the entity that would make determinations about uses. Mm-hmm. But with the change of putting nonconformities in Section 5, that led to a disconnect, because now the ZBA is involved in the town center zoning decisions. And so that really should be corrected. And the only way to do that is to correct or add additional language to Section 10.3.2, which sets forth the roles of the ZBA, and then Section 10.4.2, which sets forth the roles of the planning board. So that would have to be tweaked. If these carve-outs for the single-family and two-family houses and the Depot Square district remained in Section 5. And then the other really big problem that I have is with the draft of the warrant articles that I received. Were you able to make copies for the planning board, Mark?
I believe they're in the packet.
They're in the packet. So, you might take a look at them and you can immediately see that they're a word salad, number one. And number two, the appendices that are referenced in the two warrant articles have not been drafted. So the way this is structured is the zoning amendments that require a majority vote, and those are the 3A districts, are separated out from the zoning articles that require a 2/3 amendment. So there are 3A zoning districts in the town center, and then the Asbury Street satellite zoning district. So they're all put together in let's just call it Article 1. And then the Depot Square and the Bay Road Civic are part of Article 2. So we could look at this language again, but I really think that it just has to be clarified. And then the other thing, and this is what really concerns me, is that there's going to be some effort to deconstruct, I guess, and not having seen it, I am really intrigued as to how this is going to work, but deconstruct Section 9.8 and any of the other proposed amendments to the zoning bylaw so that only the ones applicable to Article 1 are in Appendix A and only those in Article 2 are in Appendix B. We haven't seen how that's going to work. I haven't even, looked as to how I would do it if someone tasked me with that. But just as something that's obvious, the table of use regulations would have to be separated, one for Article 1, Appendix A, and one for Article 2, Appendix B. So you would have to go through all of it and separate out applicable language. And frankly, and this is my personal view, others may differ, as a planning board member, I would not be comfortable voting this evening to approve the warrant articles for which I've seen just a draft, and to approve appendices that haven't even been drafted. I think that would be, in my view, it would be irresponsible. I would be unable to recommend.
Yeah, I mean, if we don't have it to look at, how can you say you approve? I mean, I just think you have to have the language.
It's pretty
It's kind of like
commonsensical.
signing a contract. I mean, you want to read the contract. You don't want to be like, oh, you're going to give me a contract later? I'll just sign it out of the...
Well, it's sign the contract and you can add whatever provisions
Correct,
you want.
exactly. So I think that's wise, Marnie. I don't think we should be voting.
So,
Responsibility to vote on the warrant
well, that's the
articles,
interesting
or are we
point.
being asked just as a courtesy to provide feedback?
No, here's the way it works. Chapter 40A, Section 5 provides that the planning board is to do a report and recommendation to town meeting with respect to what we have in front of us. If we do not do that and 21 days elapse, then the articles can be voted at town meeting without a planning board report and recommendation.
But the vote that we're providing is on the bylaw, not necessarily in the warrant articles, but on the bylaw
That's an
itself.
interesting point, and maybe town council can clarify it, but it seems to me that we would have to vote to approve the warrant articles, because if you look at the warrant articles that are in your package, it says recommendations from the Select Board, Finance Advisory Committee, and Planning Board, if provided, and associated vote tallies. So that's how we worked it when we proposed zoning amendments.
Right.
We made a report and recommendation
Right.
with respect to the warrant article.
Just don't recall approving the warrant article. I
Pardon?
remember the bylaw updates and voting to approve those, but I don't recall the vote to approve.
Well, the warrant article
warrant articles.
in the appendix had the underlined in the strike-through.
Yeah.
So,
Revisions that we had
So-
made. Yeah.
Everything,
so
all the details.
we were basically approving what we had drafted.
I understand.
And what we have in front of us is one thing, but because it's being pulled
don't.
apart, we don't have that to evaluate. And that's not an inconsequential task.
Correct.
And so I would want to review it and make sure there are no errors in it. I mean, and it's easy enough to see how there could be mistakes in that.
Right.
You would assume they would request Util to do that, since they are the ones developing the ins and outs of the language that are.
Well, that's something I don't know. I don't know who was in the
Deliverables
contract was responsible for preparing the
So
warrant.
Matt
Matthew's
is here
on-
tonight.
On the Zoom call.
Yeah.
So
He is on.
Want to ask him?
why don't we engage him on that?
Oh, look
Oh,
at
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
We didn't
So,
prepare
I believe,
the warrant articles.
KP has drafted at least the initial warrant, and they're obviously the resource on how the warrant has to be laid out. And my understanding is they've told us the 3A has to be separate because the
Right.
quantum of vote is lower.
Correct.
But I think, Carolyn, it might be interesting to chat with you. Could the town take a position that the town center zoning is all interconnected and we really can't separate it? So could we really push that it be one article, and with the understanding it would require 2/3 vote?
So for the record, Carolyn Murray from
Oh, we
KP
can't
Law,
hear
folks.
you.
Very nice to join you this evening.
We can't hear you.
In response to that question, is it possible to have everything for the town center combined? It is
If you can't
technically
hear us,
possible.
Sorry, we're having trouble hearing you.
Oh,
Why can't you only hear him?
I have no idea.
I was going to say, I'm not muted. Can,
It's probably her. It's probably our audio, but.
No, we moved this one to here.
Matthew, how about you try
Speaking
talking?
into the-
I can hear Carolyn.
Yeah,
You-
I can hardly hear anyone.
they're all, you guys are all quiet.
can anyone besides Matthew hear me?
I don't think it's you, Mark, because
Okay.
these guys are just messing with the volumes.
Carolyn, I'm sorry. I'm going to see if we can get it might be
Okay.
on our side. We'll see if we can get the volume increase.
Thank you.
The master volume tool said don't touch, you might want to touch it.
Don't.
You hear them faintly, so
I think it's-
something's working. It might
We
be
turned
volume.
it down and that's when the
Feedback
the
stuff.
feedback stopped,
Right.
but maybe they adjusted something over there and that could be turned back up again.
We don't know.
I don't know who would change it, yeah.
Carolyn, do you want to try one more time?
Certainly. Is that any better?
Unfortunately, it's very low.
Oh, for 3A?
Yeah.
There's that section on
Bear with us one
Asbury, and
minute.
then there's also downtown.
Downtown.
There's two separate.
Downtown is covered by its own. The overlay doesn't cover the whole town.
Right.
What is the
So
mystery?
that's what we're saying, we have to separate out the two zones that have 3A.
One is covered, one meets 3A.
Fellow who knew
because
it is left.
Mixed use and other kinds of zoning, multifamily allowed. So the MFOD is an overlay on top of the 2-acre zoning that already exists in the Asbury Street area. Doesn't apply townwide, right?
Right. That's my understanding. Yeah, my understanding. It might be good to clarify. Whoa! There's, all right, I'm going to use the bathroom while we're waiting. Because
Carolyn, can you try talking now?
Can you hear me now?
Nope.
But Matthew, you can still hear me, right?
Yes, I can.
Now we
Now we
can.
can. Now we can.
Yes,
Oh, now you can?
yes.
Okay, should I wait for whoever it was to come back, or?
No, Mark's back. You can, but you have to start over because we didn't hear.
Okay. Okay. Well, all I really said was, for the record, Carolyn Murray from KP Law, and a pleasure to join you folks this evening. In answer to the question of could you keep everything relative to this town center combined into one article, in theory, yes, you could, but I think that runs afoul of Chapter 48, Section 5, and the recent amendments that now make it such that anything that requires a majority vote shall not be combined with amendments that require a 2/3 vote. So since part of your 3A zoning subdistricts are combined in the town center, they really should be separated.
Here's another question. I mean, I understand why the vote should be separated, but can the appendix be the same for both? Or is that just sleight of hand?
Well, it's not going to be the same for both, because the things that are subject to a majority vote are going to be the things relative to your MBTA compliance. So your multifamily use by right, for example. Other things outside of that are with respect to, say, the two sub-districts in the town center that are not included in your 3A zoning are going to be subject to a 2/3 vote. Now, I do think by reading this, there is going to be obviously some overlap, especially with respect to the form-based zoning. I think there's an awful lot of overlap there. But we've got to do our best to separate out what applies just for 3A zoning and what applies to, say, I'll call all other traditional zoning.
Right, so has anybody started that task? Because it seems to me it's going to be pretty squirrely.
The task has not yet been started. I've had conversations, multiple conversations with my colleague Robin Stein since she asked me to cover this meeting yesterday. I know part of what she has some ideas in her head of how she sees this coming together. I think she was also expecting, she didn't know about the select board being amenable to pushing the special town meeting date off to July. So I think what she was expecting going into tonight's meeting was that there would at least be a recommendation from the planning board and any further changes, all of which she would then incorporate into, segregating them out into the appendices.
Well,
but if we've now got some additional time, she'll take whatever direction she gets this evening.
Right. Well, that's the question that I have. We vote, well, we do a report and recommendation with respect to the warrant articles. Mm-hmm. And because of that, we need to see the appendices. Because the appendices are going to be different than section 9.7 and 9.8. And equally importantly, the proposed amendments to the other sections of our zoning bylaw, section 3, section 5, whatever, they will all have to be pulled apart as well. Do you follow me?
I do follow you, and I can tell you I had to do this very exercise in another community relative to ADU zoning, where they combined certain aspects that were now subject to a majority vote with a 2/3 vote, and I was tasked with the one of pulling the two apart so that there could be two separate votes. And I appreciate that you've got an awful lot of zoning amendments on the table here with some overlapping aspects and then other aspects that will stand on their own. I do think if there's going to be an opportunity for some more time, that gives us all a chance to make sure we get this right and we do the proofreading that needs to be done to make sure that everything belongs where it should in the zoning amendments and the appendices.
Right. We would need that
Yes.
by June 10th. Actually, the sooner the better. But our next meeting is June 17th. We can't get this information at the last minute and make sense of it. I mean, there are people on this planning board that work. There are also people that are retired and work on planning board stuff. Just saying. I'd like to see how you engineer that, because to me it looks like a pretty onerous task. It just doesn't seem to me that straightforward, but I could be wrong. I mean, I haven't looked at how that would play out, but so we're not just looking at section 9.8 and 9.7 and the proposed amendments to the bylaw. We have to look at the actual language of the warrant article and these appendices, in my opinion. I think that's what we report and recommend on, not just the underlying documents, if you will.
Well, and is July 10th an arbitrary date that was just thrown out in conversation casually?
No, our next meeting is June 17th.
No, the
the July
date that
10th.
Bill and Joe were talking about. I think I guess if anything changes weren't we waiting on something to happen with the state to wonder whether or not the timeline that they were holding us against
they wanted
July 14th. That's
the date for compliance is that
July 14th.
July
No,
14th
but
now?
there's
to
the,
stay in compliance.
yeah,
Stay
but I
compliance.
think
So that's the
there's
reason
some
for the
court
10th. Yeah.
cases
Okay.
with Wenham and the 12 residents.
Right, but nonetheless, July 14th is the compliance deadline.
I wasn't aware of the 14th being so
Right,
that's the
and
reason for the
so
10th. Yep.
from what I understand it, the executive office is really interested in a vote. I don't think there is interested in the outcome of the vote as just a vote. So
But your recommendation to the select board 2 meetings ago was to see if we can postpone it to the fall, and that was flat out denied. Is that what I'm to understand?
that's the inference I'm drawing from the July 10th date. But we'll see how it goes. I mean, we can make progress, but it's going to be all hands on deck.
Yeah.
I guess I don't quite see why the overlay district cannot apply to both Asbury Street and downtown, all 3 districts downtown.
Well,
Hold on a second. And then we can vote on that before July 14th. And then we regard the very interesting and, you know, in some ways elegant form-based code for downtown as a separate zoning ordinance for just that area. And I'm not sure that they're mutually exclusive. So rather than think of the multifamily overlay district as just applying to Asbury Street, if it applies to Asbury Street and the downtown, we can vote that in one fell swoop. That meets the 3A mandate. And then we think of the form-based code and the design standards downtown as a second, zoning change that applies just in those areas.
and I actually thought of that.
And they would be, they could be timed differently. I mean, we could hurry up one to meet the July 14th and then do the other one later in the summer. Or whatever.
The question on that is if you apply zoning over the 3A district afterwards, are you making it more difficult for people to comply, and would the state accept that?
Well, the state apparently has accepted what's been proposed now.
Right, but if you separate these two things...
Right, I understand what you're saying, but it would be logically inconsistent for them to accept the 3A districts with the form-based code as it stands.
If they're passed together, then we're still going to have the issue that the state will look at this and say, oh, this is a very interesting package deal that they did here. But this part of the package deal negates the value of that part of the package deal. I think either way you have to be sure that whatever height limits and setbacks and other design standards that you impose in the multifamily district are not contradictory with the form-based code.
I think Matthew could answer this because this project started off having a downtown residential not included in the form-based code, and it was changed at some point. So maybe Matthew can elaborate a little on that.
But just to clarify, are we talking about the downtown residential portion of the downtown, or more generally the downtown?
Hear you, Matthew.
Whatever Bill touched.
Got a problem with the audio.
Yeah, we don't know. We had, somehow it fixed. How did we fix it with the loft situation? Anyone? It somehow started to work. This poor girl. Oh.
We'll deal with the feedback, just get the volume up.
Do you think that's feasible or not?
Yeah, I think it is feasible. And we may have told him to make everything fit.
This was right below the squeak. We had it
But
down.
now it's not so.
Matt, can you try talking now?
Yes, can you hear me?
Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
we can.
Can.
Yes.
Okay. Maybe, Emil, if you could just, so I'm sure that I'm understanding what I think I'm understanding, if you could reframe the question.
Yeah, I think the question that we asked, or Bill was asking, was if the downtown residential were to be made using the same overlay code as Asbury Street instead of the form-based code. Is that possible? Then we could combine those two as one vote, and the form-based code, which would be limited to really the basic 4 districts in the downtown area, then that would be another vote. So they might be separated easier that way.
Well, but
That's possible, but the downtown residential on its own will not get you compliance with 3A.
You
In other
need-
words,
yeah,
you'll
it's
still
two
need those other districts.
I think the idea
You need
is
the
that
two
we would
mixed-use districts.
combine the downtown residential and the Asbury Street as one overlay area that would meet the 3A requirements.
it
And then the
won't.
form-based code is a secondary thing on top of it.
So he said it won't because of acreage and numbers.
There's not enough acreage?
Right.
Okay, I think there's a confusion. So that we have a sub-district called downtown residential. And then more generally, we have residential uses that are allowed in 3 of the 5 downtown districts. And I think what maybe the question was could we apply a very light touch overlay with just the dimensional requirements to meet 3A in those downtown residential allowing districts,
Which together
and then
as
have
Asbury would.
a second vote on a form-based thing that comes in after the fact. Am I understanding that right?
Yes.
Okay. And these would be voted on in the same town meeting. And I suppose you mean that it's a kind of a both and.
No, the form-based code would wait, and we'd just vote on the 3A districts.
It's possible.
We're a little under the gun on the 3A, but the form-based elaboration could be later, not, we want to get it done, but it's not under the same time pressure as the 3A.
And then my
Right. I
question
mean,
was,
I
how
would say
the
though
state
that the issue is that even if we were just to apply a simple overlay to those downtown areas, there's still a lot of decisions that have to be made on the dimensional tables and that sort of thing. Those were quite simple for the Asbury area because we have 2 big parcels. We applied some reasonable metrics that aligned with the underlying zoning with regard to setbacks and the like. In the town center areas, it would still require some scrutiny and some conversation about what those numbers actually would be.
So are you suggesting that going down that route would not really expedite the process that we're undertaking now to get this done for a July 10th meeting?
Yeah, so I think it's probably a question of, is it easier to go through kind of a whole rewriting and decision-making of a brand-new sort of a second overlay district with discussions about dimensions and so forth, versus the conversations about how the 3A pieces and the non-3A pieces are decoupled. But seems to me that's the sort of how difficult are those relative to each other? From our end, the coming up with numbers, 3A compliant numbers just on a chart, we have setbacks and lot sizes and stuff, and plugging that into the model. The mechanics of that don't take us very long, but constructing a whole other overlay district bylaw and then adequately processing that through planning board and the back and forth and the decisions, I think that would take some time.
Right.
I agree. Not to mention, we lose the advertised benefit of the additional control that the form-based
Right.
application
Yeah.
made to the 3. I think if we had started last year doing this in the way we're describing and separating the two, then maybe, like I think you were talking about bucketing.
Well,
That was Jonathan's idea.
I had
And
the-
now we're back.
No,
I think we are where we are with the.
Yes,
with
I
this.
had the same
We just have to
question
figure out
as
how to make it
Bill,
work in the warrant.
and answered it like, nah, not going to work.
Not going to work.
It's too late. It's a good question, but when I started thinking about
But
it,
when we file for compliance with the state, we're going to be telling the state that it's the combination of two separate ordinances that meets our 3A requirement. Combination of the overlay district for Asbury and the combination of whatever uses and design standards we impose on the downtown. And it's the sum of the area in those two areas that meets 3A. So, and they're going to look at it and say, well, one obviously does, that's Asbury, because it's very, loose in some sense. But they're going to probably look very carefully at the downtown, because that's the one that's close to the train station, and say, well, is there everything here, or is there some contradictions that mean it's going to be very difficult to build multifamily here because of the way they're designed or laid out or whatever? They could conceivably come back to us and say, well, thank you very much, but half of this works and the other half doesn't, or you have to make some changes in the other. So there are two pieces to this no matter what we do.
right, but I think that what Matt was saying is that even if we adopted your suggestion, it would be very difficult to make the July 14th deadline. It would require them to rework a lot of things, and then the existing zoning would still be in place.
Right.
So I think that we should proceed on the track that we're on. I think that is a better use of our time. So let's just, we talked about the warrant articles in Appendix A and B, but then there's also just an issue that in Section 9.8, our latest draft refers to sub-districts. The warrant articles refer to districts. So 9.8, 5 sub-districts, warrant article, 5 districts. That has to be cleaned up. I have gone through the final version of Section 9.8. I did find a few typographical errors, but there is proofreading that remains to be done. I also noted that, and I may have brought this up before, I think I did in the materials I sent to Mark that were forwarded to UTL. There was some proofreading that I did there, but I think we need to add a provision to the bylaw that authorizes the planning board to issue regulations, and I have some proposed language that could be inserted. And then I don't know if we'll have time for this, but it would be really helpful if the planning board could generate some hypotheticals and then try and understand how the form-based code would work in relation to those hypotheticals. So one example would be the building that houses the Blue Peacock. That, I think it's out of business, but it's still a design firm that operates out of that former residence. What happens when they want to add a small addition or a large addition? What's the process? So we do actually need regulations that, the ability to adopt regulations saying what is required for any type of application. And also this road testing to see how all of this would come together. And there was one other small minor point I had, and that was with respect to what was it, substantial, what was it, Emil? Substantial improvements. There was a definition for that I thought was awkwardly phrased, so I would like to see that adjusted as well. And I think that was a new definition that was just added in the fourth
Draft.
iteration, the fourth draft. Now, those are my comments. Did any of you have any other issues that we should address as a planning board?
I'd like to broken record the building materials section, and I'm wondering just why we aren't brave enough to add some sustainability language in there as it relates to the building materials. UTIL provided an example of something specifically excluded, which is energy performance. And they were afraid that language related to recommending the use of sustainable materials in building and lessening the impact on the environment might be something they're afraid the state might react negatively to it. And my opinion is let them redline it out. I met with the energy chief. She thought it was an excellent idea as it relates to this. I just don't understand why we can't be brave enough to put language like that in the code and let the state redline it out. Let them tell us that it's not a good idea to build sustainably and source materials from certain distances from the job site. There's a lot of options. It's not, a lot of construction firms are adopting these technologies, not because they're difficult or more expensive, because they're just as cheap and just as easy to construct. So I don't understand why we can't include something like that. And if they don't have experience with it, I wrote language. I specifically called out the materials to avoid and some metrics you target for sourcing local material. Not to mention it benefits the local suppliers of these materials. So.
Correct.
Did you actually draft that language and
drafted
forward
the
it
exact
to
language,
Mark?
and I redlined it, and forwarded it to Mark, and it was just excluded. It wasn't even commented on.
Pat, this is Darcy. I just want to say I agree with you 100%. Thank you for bringing it up. Thank you.
Matt, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think what we said before was I do believe it compromises the state approval, right? It's putting an additional burden on a specific district. You may have a better chance if you impose these requirements town-wide. I will, of course, defer to KP Law on this matter, but that's our reading of the situation. The second is that there are hundreds of different kinds of standards out there. This is probably not the best process to sort through what your actual goals are, how you want to implement them, how you determine whether certain requirements are not feasible or not. It requires, I think, a much deeper process. It would be a whole other kind of process to do that, and it doesn't seem feasible within the context of what we have to do here.
Carol, maybe you could comment. But my understanding is there's some requirement in the regulations that says you can do those kind of things, but they have to apply town-wide. They can't be specific to the multifamily districts. Is that
right? Sorry.
I think that's correct. Sorry, you go ahead, Carolyn.
Thank you. No, it is in the regulations that, as they specifically say, examples of requirements that would be deemed to be inconsistent with as of right use includes things that would require multifamily housing to meet higher energy efficiency standards than other uses, or a requirement that a multifamily house use achieve a third-party certification that is not required for other uses. So I think to echo what Matthew was just saying, that if it was applied a little bit more broadly and not quite so tied to 3A zoning, I think, yes, those are goals that could be implemented. But to tie it with 3A zoning, there is the possibility that, yes, this goes off to the Attorney General's office or EOHLC, and they strike it because they say, where else in town our residential use is being held to similar standards.
Let me ask you this question then. So, for example, what if we adopted a town-wide regulation with respect to that? Could that be, in a sense, retroactive to the 3A zoning and the town center zoning?
I think that makes it a little bit easier for it to pass muster at the state level, yes.
But I guess what I'm recommending is, so we were just having a conversation about separating the 3A compliance elements of the form-based code with the things that we're voting on separately. An enhancement of a form-based code that we're going to apply with some benefits for the town. And this is for multi-family commercial development. These requirements you wouldn't want to put on a homeowner, but
Well, you could carve out single-family houses. You could. Well, it's such a good idea. I'm thinking if you make it town-wide, you could make it applicable to projects of a certain size or the expenditure of a certain amount of money. Because thinking of that, and this is way off topic, but I think we also, as a planning board, need to think about a tree preservation bylaw. Mm-hmm. So, there are additional bylaws that we can think about drafting that would apply town-wide and wouldn't have the problems that are being raised now. And given our time constraints here, we can't really do a deep dive into what.
I get it. No, I understand.
Works. And that's, I agree with you. It's an excellent idea, and I think we should look at it town-wide. I mean, it's consistent with the town's conservation goals and all that kind of stuff. So. Did anybody else have any overall general comments? Because now that we've gone through my list, we can kind of go back and try and get a sense of where we are and how we can address these issues. No? Okay. So the first one, and I think that the most important one, is this business with nonconformities. And I think that Emil provided us with some ideas as to what we could do with that would be a little more specific and more readily understandable by the public. Do you all have that in front of you?
Did Matt receive this?
I don't know. Did you send this to Matt?
I've only just opened it. But I've glanced at it, yes.
Do we want to let Matt comment on it, or?
Absolutely.
No.
Emil, do you want to maybe describe it first, or?
Yeah, really two parts. The first one is the purpose and intent. One thing we thought that it would be good to sort of make the distinction that this, that part of this form-based code is to establish a direction for the downtown area. So to alert people as to what the intention is down the road, that is to bring buildings and structures and land in whole or in part to be in conformance with each other. So that idea, I think, is not readily discernible, I think, from the Section 5 write-up. I think that's an important thing. It sort of gives direction to somebody in the future on a planning board thinking about what kind of decision should be made, what is the principle that we're trying to uphold. And again, with a form-based code, it is really to establish an overall conformance standard that would kind of strengthen certain aspects of the downtown area.
Isn't it also to maintain an aesthetic that already exists and characterizes that part of town?
Yeah, everything really is based on the existing character. That's how it was established. But the idea just to remind everybody, yes, the character is established building by building, but I think the idea of the organization of the downtown and sort of reinforcing the street wall with the face of a building, that idea is really kind of the goal, part of the goal in the form-based code. Not really aesthetic so much as it is organizational. And what UTILA has done is use the downtown character as the building block. That is sort of the basic element in a downtown. And using that going forward, what are appropriate building standards, to use going forward.
Like a lot of architects, you don't want to use the word aesthetic, but
no.
I think actually...
I think aesthetic would be...
I think the people in the town would understand
respond to that
it better if you use that term.
Yeah, well, a lot of people, and Matthew can answer this, but the idea of subjectivity for a lot of people is a relevant discussion to have. So, yeah, that would be a reason that we don't use it so much, but character is another way of saying it. And that really is meaningful, I think.
I mean, we're not saying it's a good or bad aesthetic.
No.
We're saying it's an existing aesthetic. And people like it, and they don't want something radically different.
Yeah. I don't know, Matthew, do you want to comment on that?
I think character's fine. Particularly if we're talking about subjective things. And I also think, before we get into the rest of this, I think I see no harm in somewhere clarifying what the purpose and the intent of the way that nonconformities are addressed is included.
And then the second part is talking about nonconforming uses a little bit more, and because I thought what was in our section 5 was a little bit thin there, not clear as to what would happen. And this is really about, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of somebody who owns a piece of property in downtown, wants to make a change. So what do you do? Where do you go? And what can you expect to find once you get into the codes and so forth? Try to follow the path that's being laid out here. Because it is a roadway to any kind of changes. So and again, just establishing sort of limits and triggers as part of that for both uses and for structures, so people would be alerted at the outset as to what to expect when you reach a certain point, like the 50% of the assessed value of the building, as assessed for tax purposes. And that is a known quantity then for a lot of people who want to make changes and be helpful for them in making a decision going forward. And I think that triggering mechanism, is important to establish, whether you go partial replacement or anything above 50% replacement is it's instructive to have that in, in there. And modifications, limits, and then discontinuance of uses is a useful one, I think, in there. I don't think that was in the section 5. And then the structures, the thing that bothered me the most about that was in trying to read it, and because of the language, the kind of the double negative language, that it would be better to kind of use a more positive description of do this, or when this happens, then this happens kind of language, as opposed to sort of what, and there is a general statement, non-conforming structure may not be enlarged or altered in a way which increases its non-conformity. I guess you can do that, but that requires a variance, and that variance was from the ZBA. But the idea of about not increasing nonconformity is kind of standard, and that's kind of easy to state, I believe. But it's the rest of it that becomes more difficult to understand, the idea of an accessory building, an accessory structure. It could be, a garage building behind the main building on Bay Road. It could be, a secondary building. What happens with those particular structures? Again, it was just an effort to put more clarity in words, actually, into describing when certain things are expected to happen, and try to establish a route on how to get to who do you go to. We haven't done that yet, but I was thinking of just a kind of a chart that what is the process that takes you through from the beginning to the end to getting a permit on something. I think we can probably put that together. So that in a nutshell is sort of what I tried to do. And I looked at other codes in other communities and tried to pull together some ideas and combine them into a single 2-sheet description of uses and structures. So that was the intent. And so I just wanted to offer that, to the planning board, to you, if you want to take advantage of that or not. And just basically for discussion purposes.
I can offer some comments if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
So just to back up, the way that we amended the nonconformity section was our intention was not to reinvent townwide or things were applied. It was simply meant to extend some of the specificity towards the new dimensional metrics that we have in the form-based code that were not mentioned in that section. And if you find that existing section 5.1 confusing, I think it is because it is extremely specific, and it actually differentiates between different kinds of nonconformities. For instance, whether it's a nonconforming lot or whether it is a nonconforming structure or both. As it is written now, I believe if you have a both nonconforming lot and a nonconforming structure, you need to get a variance. If you have just one of those things, then there are certain conditions, and it's written in a very specific way that is not reflected in this language that I'm looking at here on my screen. In my opinion, it's fine to say that a nonconforming use can be altered so long as it doesn't increase the nonconformity, but that gives your plan reviewer a huge amount of interpretation to do. And I think that your section 5 was written specifically to narrow some of those interpretations. So I don't know if we're talking about completely rewriting section 5 or whether we're going to do our best to pitch the 3A, not adapt what we need for our section to your existing 5, or whether we're going to completely change it just for this section. My concern, and I haven't, this may be a question for Carolyn and the KP Law team, is whether creating a completely different standard for nonconformities in this one district that's different than the rest of the town and the rest of the bylaw, does that create any conflicts or complexities that might be unintended?
Well, if I could respond to that, if I may. We've got to be careful here because much of what governs how we address non-conforming uses is found in Chapter 40A. And of course, we have a very specific special treatment for, say, single and two-family houses in 40A versus, say, commercial uses, for example. I do think that if we treat non-conforming uses in one district with greater or less flexibility than in another district, or subject them to a different process, I think there's a risk that the Attorney General, upon review, could find certain provisions to be inconsistent with state law. And then I think also just from a practical standpoint, looking at town staff, having to think about, all right, this is a non-conforming structure or a non-conforming lot or a non-conforming use. What district is it in or what sub-district is it in? So what are the sets of rules that would apply? So I do think it could be problematic.
Well,
I'm speechless.
yeah.
I'm actually speechless because this is a form-based code. I mean, the idea is to have people comply with the form-based code. And we have a letter from the executive office, I believe, that didn't find issues with this. The only issue that was raised apparently was with site plan review. But I don't want to lose my thought here. I just had another issue that I forgot. But, you know, to think that the form-based code is going to be circumvented with people running to the, I guess, the ZBA for a variance, I don't think that'll work, because where's the undue hardship? But the way it works now is that nonconformities are addressed for single-family and two-family houses in Depot Square, and the rest of the nonconformities is based on 9.8.1.3b. And I read this before. All building structures or land in whole or in part must be used or occupied in conformance with this section. And when any building or structure in whole or in part, buildings or structures are erected, constructed, moved, enlarged, or structurally altered, they must conform to this section. That's about as broad and uninformative as you could get. I mean, no one would know what they could or couldn't do. I mean, you'd have to be either lucky to be in a single or two-family house or in the Depot Square district. But, I mean, this applies, that language applies to 3A districts. And that's in this code, not in Section 5. And, I mean, I don't see anything that says that Section 5 of our zoning bylaw applies to this. I mean, obviously, it would in part, but that we're incorporating all of Section 5 in this new these two new bylaws, 9.8 and 9.7.
Section 5 applies town-wide, so it's already covered.
Right, but I mean, it almost undercuts a form-based code then, as I see it. Tell me I'm missing something.
I'm just reading from general law. There's a sentence that says, pre-existing non-conforming structures uses may be extended or altered, provided that no such extension or alteration shall be permitted unless there's a finding by the permit granting authority or the special permit granting authority designated by ordinance or bylaw that such change, extension, or alteration shall not be substantially more detrimental than existing non-conforming use to the neighborhood. So I think we're making the planning board the special permit granting authority, so we'd have to have that language in there, but we could transfer that authority to the planning board at least.
Mm-hmm. Well, right, and that language is about as, I mean, I can't believe that's in a statute.
Not detrimental.
To the neighborhood, not detrimental. What does that mean?
Matthew, am I right that the whole downtown code is as of right? And
Yes.
There is site plan approval, so it's as of right.
It's as of right with site plan approval.
And I did
Site
notice,
plan approval is not refusal,
right,
Correct.
non-refusal.
Yes.
yeah.
So that's fine. The state isn't going to hit us on that.
I wasn't worried so much about the residential component. I think that, single and two-family dwellings in all these areas is one thing, but the commercial aspect in the mixed-use areas is another, I think. And that's the part that seemed like that was pretty vague as to, at what point are you required to come into compliance to some degree? And that was the question I had. And I think, Matthew, last meeting you said it means that everything has to come into compliance if you make a change. Is that not right?
Right, that's.
So we putting aside the 1 and 2 family part, we did add language for the Depot Square. The intention of that language was to, let's say, one of those nice shops on Railroad Avenue wanted to do an alteration.
Right.
But they were not complying with some of the newer requirements in the form-based code. Let's say that the minimum fenestration, right, or the minimum floor height. The intention was to carve those out so that adaptation or renovation of desired commercial use and commercial activity would not be sort of get completely caught up in, the minutia of the new form-based code, that those details really apply to new construction. Obviously, there's a balance and there's a judgment call about whether this board or the town wants to grant that kind of, those sorts of exceptions. But any change of use, any new construction would have to completely comply, as would any residential use. So these exceptions are only just an extension of the exceptions that already exist for 1 and 2 family. Anytime you change use to a multifamily, let's say a large house wants to subdivide into 3 units or something, anytime there's a change of use or something that is not a 1 or 2 family structure, full compliance is required.
Well, let's take a case of the gas station on Bay Road, 1-story building. This is not the Cumberland Farms, but the one across the road.
Yep.
Single story, probably non-compliant in a number of ways, on that site. They want to make a change. They want to put some additions on that. So that what would control what they could do, or when they need to come into compliance, or would they not have to come into compliance? In other words, if everything required now is to be 2 stories, do they have to put a 2nd story on that if they wanted to make a change? I don't see how that is being controlled in any way by.
Well, if it is a substantial improvement, that would be a trigger in the Depot Square area.
That's
not Depot Square.
That's not Depot Square. That's right. It's Bay Road.
2 mixed-use districts that need to be
they would have to conform completely. They don't get a pass for the nonconformities. So the continuation or the extension of what would now be a nonconforming use would require a variance, I think.
It's not explicit with for example, the example that Emil gave. It's explicit through silence. It's not explicit through statement. So I guess the question, is it clear?
I think it is explicit through statement because the Section 5 outlines, what the procedures are and what the thresholds are, and then it offers certain exceptions. So, yeah, I guess it is by silence, but I think cumbersome if you're going to name every single possible sort of condition, right?
Well, that's where I liked Emil's statement about what the underlying intent is. My concern is that we've, in a sense, got 2 warring bylaws by default here. We've got the existing bylaw, which says, don't do this, and we've got the form-based code, which says do this, and then we've got definitions where there are exceptions if it's not more non-conforming, and the question is more non-conforming to which metric, the new code or the old code, and that's where it gets tangled with the double negatives and the I've said it before, the original code says stay away from the street. The new code says get close to the street. The old code is silent on where parking is. The new code says, the parking should be beside or behind the building. So again, the Bay Road example of that gas station is a good one, because I guess what you're saying is through silence, the fact that it says that it's it has to be fully compliant if you make any change unless it meets this list of exceptions that you've stated. It's not in any of those exceptions. So if they made any change to that property, it'd have to be fully compliant. Is that how we should read this, through the silence? I know
Yes.
there's a lot of words, so that's how we should read it. I just find that a little bit unclear.
That's how your current zoning is structured.
Yeah, and I guess the question is, that's how our zoning is structured, and is this an opportunity for the form-based code downtown to stand more firmly on its own without so many sort of somewhat underlying confusing contradictions?
Yeah, like the current zoning is conventional and it's mostly use-based type thing. Very few metrics in there. There's a minimum setback, there's a building height, really, and maybe a coverage, building coverage. Not a lot of metrics to guide, because they weren't interested in where buildings were placed that much. They were interested in not doing damage, but that was the goal. We're now using a form-based code which says build it this way, and it's a completely opposite approach to what was done in the past. And so now the issue of sort of keeping buildings in perpetuity where they are in nonconformance, or to make, because I think the metric to be determined not to be detrimental to the neighborhood can mean a lot of different things to different planning boards as they come upon these projects. It doesn't suggest there is a uniform and fairly administered code here, and I think that fairness plays a large role in what, for certain landowners in the downtown, is it going to happen everywhere or just on my property or whatever? So I think you need some kind of rule there that states when you pass this known quantity, then you need full compliance. It's true in building codes, as you know, that 50% rule is true with in construction, and really in other ways they make that distinction. So I don't. Again, it seems that everything then goes to that to be essentially toward the subjective decision when to be in compliance. I mean, everybody has a right to disagree when they can come in and ask for a variance if they want to do something on a site that's not consistent with the code. That's fine, you can do that. But to give people guidance in terms of if they don't want to get a variance, they just want to build a project, put an addition on or whatever, what are the rules to go by?
Well, as it stands right now, it's you've got to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals unless you are in that 1 and 2 family category, or the Depot Square rules, exceptions that we carved out.
Yeah, and most of the buildings in Hamilton, when they wrote those codes, I'm sure, were mostly 1 and 2 family dwellings. There was not a downtown area, and so there again.
I mean, essentially, the way it's written now is, if I understand it correctly, it's up to the discretion of the Zoning Board of Appeals, or if we change it to the Planning Board, then it would be the Planning Board.
And your professional opinion, that's right? That is the way to keep it?
That's how zoning works typically, right? You have a non-conforming use, and it happens everywhere that you're no longer compliant, and so you're stuck unless there's an exception that can be applied. It's a fairly strict standard. It's a problem everywhere. I think at least 60% of the city of Boston is non-conforming, and has to go through some process. But the whole point is that there is a pathway, but it's up to the judgment of whoever the proper board is that will grant the relief.
Can I raise a more specific question about what we've got so far in front of us?
Yes.
And this has to do with dimensionality and size of building. When I talk to people in town, their biggest fear is that with these zoning changes, the town will have, big apartment buildings that are totally out of character with the town. So I'm going through the dimensional requirements, and I'm looking at where do these dimensional requirements in any way create something that we might call a maximum building size. And I can't find any. As a matter of fact, they do just the opposite. So if you go downtown, you have a minimum lot size of 5,000 square feet, a maximum coverage of 60%. Well, that's fine. But if I have a half-acre lot downtown, of which there are quite a few that are empty, and I employ a lot coverage ratio of 60%, well, that's 24,000 square feet. And then I go up 2.5 floors, and now I'm looking at a 60,000 square foot garden apartment building, which is very, very much out of character with the town. It's just a big friggin' building in the downtown. And if I go to the...
Look at the building standards, Bill.
The building standards?
Yeah.
I think the floor area ratio would limit you a little bit.
You got three things. You have floor area ratio, maximum footprint,
Where is that?
building standards. Chart. Table.
Section, allowed rooftop floors, floor area ratio.
Even that.
Even that, a floor area ratio still wouldn't prevent, thank you, would not prevent a very big building. If you have, and now we go to the Asbury Street, the minimum lot size here is 80,000 square feet, but we're down to a coverage, maximum building coverage of 20%. Well, that's 16,000 square feet times 3 that's still a 50,000 square foot building. And that's actually pretty similar to the 40B project. Well, how big is the 40B project on Britain's land?
Square footage, it's 45 units, I think.
Probably 1,000 square feet per unit, so that's about the size of that. And when that came before the board, everybody was like, oh, that's just a huge building, totally out of character. And we managed to modify it a little bit, but it was still very, very much out of character. So I would take it as an interesting exercise to see how we can, get the same amount of development on an acre, say, but have it be, 5 or 10 smaller buildings that look kind of like something that was there 100 years ago, and they each may have 2 or 3 apartments, and it all adds up, rather than one big garden apartment building,
No, but
which
they've
would be
done
very,
that.
very much out of character.
They've done that, Bill.
And how does that happen?
Table of Building Dimensional Standards, page 17 of 26.
Okay.
They have building footprint maximum per building. The footprint is the impression on the ground at the base of it. 5,000 square feet for Depot Square, 3,000 for Bay Road mixed use, Willow Street, 5,000.
Okay. There's none of that in Asbury.
No, no.
There is.
There's a building.
There's a floor area
Isn't it
ratio, I think.
8,000 square foot per building maximum.
Okay. All right. I stand totally correct, happily corrected.
And then there's a height limitation,
The height, I understand.
and then the FAR, which is an interesting
But
one.
FAR doesn't constrain the size of the building, it constrains the ratio.
Yeah, but that, when you look at the combination, that really controls what can happen there in terms of scale. I mean,
Those
Not
metrics
when you
are,
have minimum zoning, it does when you have maximum zoning, maximum lot size. Then you constrain the total size of building. But when you have minimum lot size, you can throw that FAR on a big lot, and then you have a very big building.
but when you
But
combine all
the footprint, I agree, the footprint.
all the metrics have to work
saves you.
together.
You're
All-
saved by the footprint.
All the metrics have to
Okay.
work together. They don't work independently.
One interesting thing is that what Util has done as a big improvement on the Willow Street overlay district, if you look at that code as it stands right now, they have a floor area ratio of 0.75, and Util is suggesting half that, 0.42, I guess, roughly
The
half.
footprint is
So what
what
that-
I'm looking for. The
So what that
footprint.
means, well, because of FAR could be a single-story or it could be a 10-story building. And, but it's the combination. They're limiting the overall square footage that you can build on that site, and they're limiting how much needs to go in each building. So you go with multiple buildings to achieve that area
Right,
that you're
let's,
entitled to.
can we do something similar, or should we do something similar on the MAFOD Asbury Street zoning? Because there's none of that.
But again, to take it all in context, it's not terribly different than what you were describing. If the Willow Street is being used as an example, it's 5,000 square foot. Take a half-acre lot. Take the height restrictions that you're still allowing a close to 10,000 square foot building on a half-acre lot, which doesn't exist.
No, if you take half an acre, 20,000 square feet times
Most of the buildings
0.4,
downtown are probably what?
Times
5,000
0.4, it's
square
8,000
feet.
maximum square feet. On 2 levels, that's 4,000 per level.
I'm talking about it, but that's an 8,000 square foot building.
Right. Right now, you could be up.
By my aesthetic, that's borderline, but it's not, it's, but
Well, it's a good
I'm
example.
more
It's a
worried
good example to
now that I understand that we have the building footprint maximum, do we want something similar in the 3A? Because there is no maximum footprint or maximum building size. There's only lot coverage and no constraint on the size of lot. It's quite the opposite. Minimum of 80,000 square feet. So,
In the 3A overlay, we do have, I believe it's in the notes, any individual building can have a maximum footprint of 8,000.
of 80,000, 8,000.
So there's a limitation on the building footprint of any individual building, and then there's limitations on the
Maximum
overall
building-
FAR.
Maximum building, it's printed outside the table, yeah, maximum building footprint of 8,000. So that's a 24,000 square foot building. All right. I take it back. My printout that was kind of hidden on the off page.
We do have some chats in the Zoom. Do we want to open it for public comment before it gets too late?
Yes.
Charlotte, I see your chat. Do you want to make comments or have questions for the planning board?
Sure, thank you so much. I am so sorry I joined late, so I wasn't sure when public comment was happening. I just was, when y'all were just screen sharing about the damages section, I just wanted, and I joined late, so I apologize because I was putting my daughter to bed if you already covered this. If my home, like, we had a freak tornado in Massachusetts and my home was destroyed by a tornado, I am on Carriage Lane, so I'm in the new 3A overlay zone. Would I not be able to rebuild my home because it would cost more than 50% of its assessed value without a variance?
Matthew, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think the current zoning has special provisions for what they call reconstructions. So it would allow So even if you're on a non-conforming lot or you have non-conforming yards, and the proposal and the proposed alterations is a reconstruction or repair, which does not change those underlying conditions, I believe that you're covered. You're allowed to repair something that gets damaged.
Okay.
And then but if you, again, this is the current code, reconstruction shall not include voluntary demolition. So.
Yeah. So but in the new code too, that like 50% of assessed value would not apply in that scenario.
Not to a single family. No, that provision, as we have it now in the proposed code, would only apply to the Depot Square district, which is largely commercial uses.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Anyone else like to make comments or questions? Anybody?
Could this be applied to just commercial?
Sandy Fisher, Greenbrook Road. I just want to state, well, thank you for all the work you've done on this. It's obvious you've done so much work, and I appreciate it, especially the form-based code and all of that. I do. What was that?
We don't know.
Okay. I do believe that I'm hearing, well, last night at the select board, and hear this, a desire to have a rush to comply with this July 14 mandated deadline for us to vote on 3A. And I don't agree with rushing. I think I'm hearing here there's a lot to be voting on, and when the board is having a difficult time figuring out what those things are and what the articles are, I think it's going to be very difficult to communicate to the public what this actually means for them. Mm-hmm. I also believe that, well, when someone alluded to this too, there's also this court case, from what I understand, from Wenham and some residents in Hamilton, and that's pending. It's already been heard, and it's just pending a decision. So I think that would be really helpful to know what's decided in that case before we go forward. Because I think once you vote in 3A, there's no going back. Lexington has had a lot of problems, and you can look that up. There's also, I have a concern about the Asbury Street 40B housing that's going in the 45 units. That's also a 3A, in the 3A overlay zone. And I just heard recently about a town which had approved 40B housing. They had 75 low-income housing units as part of that, and then they went and zoned for 3A, they voted it in, and that area then became part of a 3A zone. The developer then changed everything and made it a completely different development, and so the low-income housing or affordable housing, whichever one to call it, was reduced from 75 units down to 23. That's a huge concern because we already have this, from what I understand. I don't know what the stage is and what stage of approval and all this. This 40B is out on Asbury Street with the 45 units. But I'm very concerned about that because that could change. As soon as we vote this, and that's part of a 3A district, everything changes. And I really do believe that we are giving up control to the state. We just heard it, as Patrick mentioned, he would like to have sustainability written in, and he said that the state can then, if they don't like it, they can nix it. That's the thing. The state can change these guidelines. The law's like 3 or 4 paragraphs long, and it has pages and pages of guidelines that have been developed by unelected bureaucrats, and they've been revised several times already. So I'm just very concerned. I want to caution you because I don't really think we fully understand what we're getting into. I know that I don't. And so, and I've been trying to understand this. So anyway, I applaud you, I thank you, and just my cautions. Thanks.
We do have a sunset clause, right?
Well, actually, we had asked Mark at that meeting, I can't remember if you were there, it was at the COA, and he says the Attorney General has struck out lines before, so that we could put a sunset clause in, and then it could be, and then the voters could vote it in, and then the Attorney General could remove the sunset clause and us not have to re-vote on it, is my understanding. So that's a concern of mine with the sunset clause, because that would materially change. I think people might vote for it with the sunset clause, if you know what I'm saying.
Right.
This is Darcy. I just want to thank the last speaker. I want to thank her for what she said. Thank you.
Real quick, also to your first point, part of what I alluded to earlier, where Marnie went to the select board several times ago and asked for that fall postponement. Part of that was to do exactly what you said. This is very complex, and it's us getting through it with UTILE, and then having those sessions to explain to the public.
Right.
Make sure they're educated, understanding that form-based code is a good thing and it can help, and not have it drowned under 3A. That was the attempt, and it sounds like the select board's not open to pushing it out that far, so we can accommodate that, which still puts risk at this. So I agree, and I don't want to speak for money, but we did try that approach. It doesn't seem like the select board is open to that.
I appreciate the inclination or the goal of having the public vote on 3A, because essentially it will be a referendum on 3A. I think from what I understand, the executive office is less concerned with the outcome of the vote than they are with simply having a vote. And I think that may have been conveyed. And of course, the select board is concerned about any potential sources of funding. And I think you've all had an opportunity to review Representative Kristen Kastner's letter, where she sets forth various and sundry potential grants that we might not be eligible for.
But correct me if I'm wrong, part of that conversation was also trying to convey the risk of having an uneducated populace vote this down, and then we're also in noncompliance at that point, versus taking the time, being uncompliant, educating the community, and maybe getting it passed.
Well, that was my point, but apparently, from what I understand and what I've been told, is that the vote is more important than the non-compliance by not meeting the July 14th deadline and non-compliance by not having a positive vote.
But we lose form-based code at that point as well, right?
No, the form-based code can be brought up again.
But we wouldn't have had to spend $150,000 to develop 3A compliant zoning. We could have just highlighted acreage and applied if the goal was to have a vote, we didn't have to spend the money we did to develop this.
Whatever. So if you have any new points, please raise them.
Marnie. Want to hear from me? Have to introduce myself to y'all, or? Yeah.
Oh, for the record, come on.
I'm actually here to say, all right, Deb Safford, thank you, Marnie, especially, because you've taken a lot. You've stood at this podium in other meetings, and you've taken a lot coming at you. And I really felt like even yesterday the lawyer was coming after you too. And, it felt like, okay, so whose side are we all on here? And I just think that you should be commended because you have stood fearless in your desire to have it be done right and be accurate and be clear. So you're actually advocating for the citizens to be able to be informed, to be able to then vote. So I think you've been in a tough position, and I just want to thank you publicly for that. And I want to thank the board, because you guys are taking your job seriously and you're actually still engaging with the public, and you're like the last one standing, it seems like, at this point in Hamilton. So thank you for that. I'm adding my plea to this board to allow some of the other paths to play out. The board, select board alludes to a parallel path, but we have yet to see what it is. Maybe it's a false flag. I don't know if they're actually doing something, but there is also the other litigation. I think that's important because we all want affordable housing for other people to come in here. We all are okay with having some housing, but we probably wouldn't, add to the population to the size that they're demanding that we do if we didn't have to. So if some of that if we can get some relief from that, that should be an important aspect of dialing back some of the zones that are created. And once they're done, of course, we know that they won't come away. So I think it's really important to keep, allow those things to play out and keep doing the job that you're doing to allow something to get passed that actually makes sense for the town. Because I'm not against everything, obviously. I just think that we want to be smart about it and make sure we've covered all bases before we do it. I also think that the grant information is interesting, that suddenly we have all these grants coming down the line, and it feels a little bit like blackmail to me, like a threat and fear. And I just don't think we should operate in a state of fear. We've got to be intentional with what we're doing. We've got to be respectful. But I think we've also got to make sure that we're not just passing something because someone says we have to pass it out of fear. It's a little bit shocking that the message you're getting is that a vote is all that really matters because the State House is just sort of checking boxes, or they want compliance. And it should be that they want the right outcome. So let's work on having the right outcome. Let's make sure affordable housing is not going to be in jeopardy. Our 40B is not going to be in jeopardy. As a town, we've worked so hard to get those 40B numbers set. And 3A coming in is going to destroy our having met that 40B affordability. Again, this is abundant housing, not affordable housing. So I'm just trying to reiterate these points for the community and just thank you for holding firm. Thank you for allowing us to speak. Thank you for doing the due diligence and being really thoughtful. Every one of you has been really thoughtful, so I'm really grateful. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Deb. It's very kind.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment really quick on the Kastner letter. There are some of the numbers that she's actually, I'd have to look at it, but I do know that there was a differentiation that she made in there talking about the EOHLC guidelines have added some funding that could be removed, or those grants are in jeopardy, but just that the law has 4 grants that are in jeopardy, and then the EOHLC, which have made guidelines, which may be a little bit different. And then the question is, do you comply with the law or with the guidelines? I feel like those are places that are possible questions for the town. And I did read the letter, and I just want to make that clarification between those funds that are in jeopardy.
Okay, let's try and sum up.
And Tosh Blake, Sagamore Street.
Oh, sure. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Maybe I'll be the last speaker. Don't not keep you too long. Just want to agree with everything Sandy, Deb said, and Beth said. I think the prudent thing, I mean, you've heard this from me before, but is to maybe take some time with it, more time with it. Obviously, the select board, for whatever reason, maybe politics, whatever, they want to rush this through. I think unfortunately, some people on the select board, which I consider kind of treasonous to the town, or pro-3A, they may not say it publicly or explicitly like that, but we don't have a lot to lose if we wait. And it was kind of brought up tentatively at a past meeting that maybe the fall could be a good date. Even Olson on the select board, the chair, was kind of signaled even if he could commit to the fall, he might be amenable to that. Even though I know he really wants to get this done immediately, because then that would head off any outcome of any lawsuits that'd be unfavorable to the state. And it's basically a one-way ratchet. There are no kind of riders we can attach to any kind of warrant item that would bind the state. Anyway, they're not going to accept that. I think that's pretty obvious. The AG won't let that fly. And once you vote it in, it's like a one-way ratchet. You'll have to have 2/3 to vote, get rid of it. Well, and it will be an own goal before before the lawsuits and everything play out. So I would hope that at least the planning board, what you can do, you won't make the final decision, that's a select board's decision, but I would hope that you recommend against any kind of June or July. I think they pushed back the date to the 10th, maybe. Any kind of summer date. I think the fall with a regular town meeting with the whole town and not some special town meeting at a weird hour or some kind of shenanigans. Regular town meeting could vote on 3A, and if grants are maybe withdrawn or whatever, well, okay, maybe we can come into compliance once that actually happens. Then they can maybe get their grants back. But just being threatened and bullied by the state, I think, is, kind of cowardly capitulation. And, some people on the select board want you to be afraid. But I say don't be afraid, be prudent. We're talking about the future of Hamilton here, not just one kind of zoning issue that's just abstract. It's really serious. And I appreciate, like Mr. Repeat what the other people said, I appreciate all the work you've been doing both on form-based code and the planning in general. And keep up the good work. Thank you.
Okay, just one comment here. It's the select board that controls the warrant. So regardless of what individuals here on the planning board may think about how to proceed, we're bound by the decisions that they make. Right. Mark, did you forward the email I sent this morning to Matt by any chance?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, and to town council as well?
I don't think so, but I will.
Yeah, okay. So, Matt, you have Emil's proposed amendments. I would request that you look at them very carefully. The concern that I have is not Depot Square. It's not single family and two family houses. My concern is structures in the mixed use areas, Bay Road mixed use, Willow Street mixed use, what happens under those circumstances. And it's possible that what Emil has done could be applicable to commercial entities or structures used for commercial purposes in those mixed use districts. And so I really request that you consider that, because you're not getting a lot of positive feedback from the planning board on how this is structured vis-a-vis Section 5 and whatnot. So I urge you to look at that. And then the other really big issue I have is with the articles and how these new bylaw provisions and even the other changes to the existing bylaws are going to be separated. So our next meeting, and I'm going to read this correctly, is on June 17th. And so...
you want to continue this hearing?
Yes, we do, but I want all these different issues that I've identified and other people have talked about to be addressed, because I think that the planning board would very much like to be able to issue a report and recommendation to town meeting to adopt these bylaw changes. I think that the form-based code that has been developed provides the town with a level of protection that it would not have without the form-based code. Now, the other thing I would say, and this is what I interpreted Robin Stein to say last night, is, and there is in this 9.8 now a statement to the effect that if the regulations that are issued by the executive office were to change, that the town would be in a position to amend the bylaw. So what Robin seemed to be saying was that it was unclear to her whether or not a majority vote would be required to amend a bylaw that was adopted by a majority vote. In other words, the quantum of vote would track whatever the amendments were. So obviously, if you had an amendment that required a 2/3 vote, you'd need a 2/3 vote to change it. Similarly, if you had a 50% vote, you could change it with a majority vote. So that's an open issue, and that goes to Tasha's comment. And hopefully Well, I don't know. If these metrics is set forth in the regulations are ever changed, then obviously the town could take whatever steps it thought were appropriate. So I had, I don't know if I will be able to, I don't want to take the time to go through the typos that I found in section 9.8. They were not that many. And I did have a reworking of the definition of substantial improvement. And this also is something that in Emil's proposed language, he used appraised value. And I think that in the definition of substantial improvement, we should use appraised value. And I say that because appraised value is easy to find. You ask the assessor.
Or assessed value.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
Assessed.
It's assessed. I misspoke. It's the assessed value.
Not the
you
appraised.
just go to
Correct.
the assessors. Fair market value, you can get any two appraisers to disagree.
Correct.
And then you take, as I say, you take the two appraisals and divide them by 2 and add a fudge factor and say this is it. But no, we want to use the assessed value.
Yes.
Because it's the simplest to determine. And market value, we use the
Right.
term fair market value, but market value isn't even a defined.
Right.
So let's do appraised. So I can send.
Assessed.
I'm sorry, assessed.
It's getting
assessed. I'm tired.
We'll
And
just keep reminding you.
we
It's all
never
good.
used, when I was a bankruptcy lawyer, we never used assessed value. We always used fair market value, so that's why I misspoke.
No worries.
Assessed. I even wrote it wrong in my notes. There you have it. So with that said, the focus turns on Matt and KP Law to help us out here. And the sooner we can get materials so that we can, ideally, I would like to be able to get materials by June 10th so that if planning board members want to do a quick turnaround, they can send off, information to Mark, who can transmit it to either KP Law or UTIL, so that on July 17th, we are really much, much, much closer to the end game than we are now. And that we would need to get from Joe, a new timeline as to when we would have to issue a report and recommendation, when the warrant would have to be closed for a July 10th meeting. So we need all those deadlines.
Can I just ask a question on that? Mark, I understand that, we had a proposal in the fall and they came back with July 10th. Is there any room, because we know a lot of the families in this town, as soon as school ends, they're off on vacation. Is there any room here to push us back till school starts again? Is there a counter negotiation on timeline? You want to have as many people as possible in town around for the vote, right?
I don't know, I wasn't involved in the talks, but I believe the July 10th came because they're trying to meet that deadline.
Right, it's the July 14th deadline. But you're right about the vacations, because
Yeah, the graduate families are probably already left. As soon as school ends on the 16th or 18th, the rest of the families will go on vacation. It's just,
well,
Marnie, the other substantive item that you brought up that we haven't really discussed yet is the ZBA versus the planning board being
right.
the regulating
That-
body.
yes.
So I know it's late, but can we just touch on that briefly?
Right. So I did make that comment, and in the email that I sent, I suggested how there would have to be changes to. I think it's 10.3 is the sets forth the roles of the ZBA, so there would have to be an exception
Right.
for any.
So what's the action item we want to come out of this discussion?
Well, that be clarified, so that for the town center zoning, any kind of variance, anything along those lines, that has to go to the planning board if it involves town center. So you make an.
So we're saying let's change it.
Well, assuming we continue the way we are with respect to Section 5.
Right.
So if that...
But we haven't said that to Matthew yet.
Right. So I'll say it right now. So in the fourth draft, the provisions that you had in the third draft relative to single and two-family homes and the, Depot Square district were transferred to Section 5. And if that's the case, and there's no rethinking of that so that all of the nonconformities are addressed in the Section 9.8, then the issues raised in Section 5 have to be clarified in Section 10.3 and 10.4. And then this is what I'm glad I remembered. In the table of use regulations specifically, we have to clarify whether or not the proposed amendments to the zoning bylaw are referring to amendments that were adopted at the April 5th town meeting. That makes sense, but they are not final until the Attorney General passes on them, and that might not happen, well, it will not happen until after the special town meeting. But that has to be clarified, and I think that there probably needs to be some kind of disclosure in the warrant articles that there's any references that might involve one of the amendments that the planning board promoted and the town accepted on April 5th. That's what's in these documents.
I have a question about planning board, zoning board, just so I understand. What has been changed is that the planning board has become, for almost most of the, become the special permit granting authority for many of those uses in these new districts, and those are listed in the use table under planning board. Are you, just to be triply clear, you're also asking that there be a carve out, or currently the ZBA handles all of the nonconformities townwide. Right. You're asking the planning board be added, take that role specifically for the town center districts? Exactly.
Okay. And essentially at one of the meetings, we said we created it, we own it. And we have the familiarity with the form-based code that the ZBA does not. I mean, I don't think there's been a ZBA member at any of our meetings, and I don't think we've ever had any communications with them about this. So I think it's probably appropriate that the planning board take over all responsibility with respect to the town center.
But we're already scheduled here. We've crossed out the ZBA under general regulations. So we're replacing them there too?
Where are you looking, Bill?
Under general regulations 4.1, ZBA was the appeal agent, table of regulations, and then it's crossed out with footnotes. This is page 11. Maybe I have an old copy here. I don't know.
Oh, they're just crossed out because that was business district. The business district is being eliminated. So if you look on page 10, the table is split. So this is just the table of dimensional regulations, right. And they're taking out the business district. And so in the business district, this...
Got it.
Got it? Okay. So have I missed anything?
Just before we let you go, Carolyn, I've had pretty good luck with the Attorney General getting them on the phone to talk out things. Is it worth discussing this breaking out the articles thing with them? Just because it seems like it would save you a lot of time and would be more straightforward if it was one article. Is it worth kind of barking up that tree, you think, or you pretty firmly think it has to be 2 articles?
I think we know the answer. I think pretty firmly they'll come back and say no, that, you should separate out your 3A zoning from other zoning changes that should be subject to a 2/3 vote. But to your point, we have a very good working relationship with the AG's office. It's a phone call, it's an email. It wouldn't take that much time to get some feedback.
Okay, great. And then on timeline, I'd like to try to get the materials to the board quicker this time. So, Matt, I could work with you on the draft. Do you think it's feasible to have that like Monday of next week? Just to give the planning board.
While she's looking for that, would we even want to not separate out things? Because then it would be subjecting some things that should be at a 2/3 vote to a simple majority. Is that what you're suggesting? I'm confused a little bit.
Yeah, it would require 2/3, which would, be harder obviously to get, but it would just be, I think, easier for people to understand and less.
So you're saying that the 3A zoning part would even be subject to 2/3?
Yeah, if it was combined as one article, I think.
Okay, so asking the state if they would allow us to. Okay.
They won't, because it's specifically.
I understand. I was just trying to understand. I didn't know if we were trying to make it the other way around, and then I didn't know if that's something we would want to do. So,
right, and so I just want to reiterate that the draft warrant articles that I reviewed, I found to be very, very confusing. And then in Article 2, there's a mistake. It says rezone certain land from the business district to residence R1A, and this is in Depot Square. That's just a mistake. And then
it's not a mistake.
It's not.
No, there's some fragment parcels on the edge of the business district that are not near any of the other new sub-districts, and so it just reverts to 1A, R1A.
Boy,
there's literally like 1.5 parcels that are sliced off by the town line.
Yeah.
And then they would just revert to R1A, which is, it's contiguous with the R1A district.
Wow. If I stumble over all this stuff, I can't imagine what the general public is going to do. I mean, really. I mean, who knew that? But this is just so much condensed information,
right,
divorced from what's actually going to be done. So if there's some way of making this a little more straightforward, good luck. I don't know. But then, we're not really setting forth prohibited uses, because unless a use is listed, it's automatically prohibited, and that's specifically stated in section 3.1.1. But I think that we've all reached our limit on this discussion tonight.
So just real quick on timeline, Matt, do you think we can reasonably shoot for early next week?
Yeah, I'm going to follow up with you, Bark, just about the particulars of that.
Okay.
If I may, because there's a few moving parts, and I think we need to coordinate with KP Law as well.
And speaking of KP, it sounds like the planning board wants to see that the articles broken out between the two. Is that something, you're comfortable taking a stab at, or do you want to see the latest draft before you do that?
Mark, is that directed to me?
Yes.
Okay. I can talk to Robin, and maybe it might make some sense tomorrow that between you, Matt, and Robin figure out the best way to proceed. I think Robin was anticipating not having the additional time for a postponed town meeting and expecting there to be, perhaps some action tonight so she knew exactly what to work with. It doesn't sound like the revisions are terribly extensive. So I think she could start to work on pulling it apart and putting those appendices together.
Okay, great.
Right, I mean, getting started on that task, it's well advised, because whatever changes we make, will just fall in whatever bucket they fall in.
Right.
All right.
I make a motion that we continue the hearing for the proposed amendments to the zoning bylaw for 3A compliance until our next meeting on
July 17th.
is it July.
June 17th.
You just got me all
I'm
excited.
going to be fired. Fired for misspeaking.
June 17th.
Second.
All in favor? Oh, we need to roll call vote because
Darcy.
Darcy's not here. Pat Norton?
Yes.
Pat Norton?
Pat Norton, aye.
Jonathan Poor?
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Emil Dahlquist?
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Bill Wheaton?
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Beth Herr?
Aye.
Darcy Dale?
Darcy Dale, aye.
And Marnie Crouch, aye.
What you doing?
Motion to adjourn?
Are you looking?
Second.
Wait, oh, right.
Did you want to have any questions?
Any discussion?
Any discussion?
Do I have a second? Did you do the second?
Yeah.
Okay. We're adjourning.
Oh, hallelujah.
Pat Norton?
Pat Norton, aye.
Jonathan Poor?
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Emil Dahlquist?
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Bill Wheaton?
He just called you to adjourn.
Adjourn.
Beth Herr?
Aye.
Darcy Dale?
Darcy Dale, aye.
And Marnie Crouch, aye.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.